Hi, my name is Isha Binlish, and I've been debating with Doherty Valley for around 5 years now. I'd say 4 out of the 5 years, I did public forum. The first year, I had just experimented by doing LD, but since then, I've mainly stuck with public forum. Public forum, I think, is a very great experience for you all to do. It's very engaging and you learn a lot from it. However, before going into that, I'd say a main issue that we really need to bring up is how exclusionary debate is. And it's something that I've not only witnessed that a lot of people have been going through, but it's also something I've gone through myself, which is why I'm so passionate about the issue and which is why I made a diversity, equity, and inclusion presentation for you all to go through. There's a lot of content here, but I'll try to break it down as simply as I can. The tops are quotes from research pertaining issues about how debate is exclusionary. It talks about how a lot of people face misogyny in debate, but it also tackles the issue of how a lot of people in debate, not intentionally, but they manipulate issues to fit into their contention ideas, or they just exploit a lot of the issues in debate and really don't go deep into the real issues or the roots, but they just kind of thread over the issues, which is a large issue in debate, especially just because the issue isn't really getting talked about. It's just getting thread over, which doesn't really solve the issue or bring awareness to. Um, at the bottom, I'd say that these are things I've heard debaters say to other debaters, and it includes a lot of homophobic things and a lot of like misogynistic, homophobic, and racist things I've heard in general that I've also not included. But as you can see, these are all pretty disheartening as it shows the extent of the issue of exclusion in debate. But I really hope it showcases to everyone here how desperately we need to change the way we act in and out around to ensure debaters feel as safe as possible. For in-round exclusion, I've seen a lot of these issues in-round been happening during cross. First, the issue I've seen is that people are getting cut off a lot, and this happens mainly during cross because it's the only time where people are talking directly towards each other than reading the arguments that they're running. And I think this is a large issue because people aren't able to say what they want to say. They're just continuously getting cut off. I do understand there is a time limit when it comes to cross, so it makes people, I guess, more anxious about saying what they want to say. However, cutting people off is first off rude. It doesn't make the person who's getting cut off feel respected. It makes them feel a bit excluded because they aren't able to say the things they want to say. Instead, they have to listen to someone else say what they want to say. And I think there's a lot of alternatives that can be done rather than cutting someone off, such as asking someone if they can speak, talking about different issues at different times, just overall just waiting for someone to finish rather than interrupting them very rudely and talking about your issue. I think we can solve this by asking or just overall just waiting for people to finish. Unfortunately, another issue I've seen is that a lot of people smirk or laugh when someone is speaking. A lot of the times, at least from what I've witnessed, it's been spectators who are friends of one of the debaters in the round or spectators in general, judges, or even your own opponents. Whenever you laugh or smirk when someone's speaking, it just shows you don't respect them in general. And I'd say this is a very exclusionary act because not only does it make the person speaking feel very like singled out, it makes them feel very uncomfortable because it feels like their ideas aren't being heard or being taken into consideration for. Another thing I've seen is that a lot of people are talked down to during cross. I've experienced this a lot where someone changes their tone when they're talking to me directly to make me feel inferior or just make my ideas seem inferior. This is something I'm very like passionate about because it's happened to me a bunch of times. And I'd say this is a very big part of exclusion in debate because when you're talking down to someone, it makes them feel like their ideas aren't as important as they should be, which is a form of exclusion because you're not considering their ideas. I think the huge issue here that I've seen and experienced a lot in debate is misgendering. A lot of the times, I think a good thing is to solve this issue first is to ask people what their pronouns are, or not only that, use gender neutral pronouns, or first look on tab room to see if anyone's posted their pronouns, which is something I encourage you all very much to do because misgendering very much is a very big issue in debate, not only because people are first assuming people's pronouns based on how they look, which first off is very wrong. They're not reading tab rooms and they're not reading social medias where pronouns could potentially be posted. Overall, this is a very harmful act because it makes someone feel singled out, it makes them feel unincluded, it makes them feel unsafe in the debate space because it's like their identity isn't being respected, which is something we really need to prioritize. I do understand that in the debate space, people get very caught up while they're speaking, but even like the slightest action of misgendering is very uncomfortable for the person and it's very wrong, which is something we should work towards stopping. The last thing I want to talk about in-round exclusion is saying insensitive comments about very sensitive issues. The earliest experience I can remember about this issue was when I was in 8th grade. I think this was during the quarantine era of debate. So this was during an online debate. And so what's happening was that I was running an argument about the West Africa topic, and I'd been talking about how we needed to increase sexual education for women because a lot of the women in West Africa were getting pregnant unnecessarily and they were suffering a lot because of their health. They couldn't afford it and things like that. And one of my former friends, who I'd been debating against, had made a very insensitive comment about this. And he had said that women could just get abortions if they need to. There's no really need for sexual education. And once I heard that comment, of course, I like immediately called him out. It was a practice debate. Even if it was a real debate, I definitely would have called him out. Because first off, it's very insensitive about the issue of abortion. It's very insensitive to the traumatic experience about abortion. And overall, it was just a very unneeded response for him to say. So I think a lot of the times in debate, people do get caught up in different arguments, trying to respond to different arguments. But at the end of the day, it's not about winning the debate. It's about having fun while you're doing it. And someone cannot fully experience the fun of debate if they don't feel safe, which is how unsensitive comments make people feel, because they do not make people feel safe as they're talking about harmful issues and how they're talking about how people are causing harm towards those just because they aren't really respecting the issue that they brought up in the first place. And especially when you're bringing up a sensitive issue in the first place, it's obviously something you're very passionate about. So hearing someone say a very insensitive comment isn't the best way to go, and it's not something you really want to hear. And it's something I think everyone needs to work on. Even I'd say I'd have to work on it, just really thinking before you speak and just remembering at the end of the day, these are real issues and these are real people you're engaging with. Over here is an example cross, and so this is Doherty Valley versus Blacksburg in 2021 octafinals of Public Forum Gold. And so before I started really quick, it's just to give context, they were arguing whether someone should have read trigger warning on this, and so this was a very sensitive issue and a very sensitive debate. However, people started getting very angry, accusing different people of things, yelling, interrupting. And so this is an example of how a cross should not go and how we should avoid this.
Yeah, our point is just that we didn't read, like, the only things we talked about were things like poverty or malnutrition, which your case also mentions in every PF.
Okay, my point is that you say like, oh, it's not graphic, it's about women's lives, but not graphic. So how do you get out of the fact that our trigger warning, which we literally read to everybody in round, says non-graphic descriptions of women's rights, right? And somebody still opted out. Somebody still said that that made them unsafe, and you still chose to read an argument that was going to compromise the mental status of somebody in this round.
Okay. Can I answer? So yeah. You said non-graphic descriptions of issues like abortion. I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about this if there are people who opted out are still in the room. So like, I'll wait a second for anyone who wants to.
No, you don't have to say it. We said like our literal
yours is very different because
but it's not. Yeah.
When you mention things like abortion, the issue is that has connotations with things like assault or physical harm that an economic violation just doesn't have. This is things like unemployment. We discuss these issues in debate all the time. When you read a theory show and detract from me and Sanjita to be able to talk about the past oppression of like our own people, that's way worse for debate. Can I get a question?
Okay, I wanna bring that back. So
I'll stop the video here, but as you can see, there's a lot of dismissal of ideas. First off, a lot of interrupting, a lot of yelling, and this is just not how a round should be going. Even if there are sensitive issues being brought up, I do understand how an argument can get very heated, but at the same time, we really need to respect other people while we're giving cross.
Yeah,
sorry. And then I'd like to talk about out of round violations and how out of round things can affect exclusion. So first off, a big issue I've seen is also how debaters are acting out of round. I've seen a large amount of exclusion in prep groups, team spaces, not allowing or listening to other people who are speaking, or a big issue in debate, which I'd say is talking bad about your opponents after a round. With prep groups, I've seen a lot of the times it's only the best debaters or well-known teams who have prep groups together rather than a diverse amount of teams who maybe aren't as well known. And so I think we should really strive to be as more exclusive and more inclusive about prep groups, just so more people are able to get the high quality prep that some teams are able to get more easily. And then for team spaces, I have a lot to say about team spaces just because a few years ago, when I first joined my team, I didn't feel very included just because I hadn't been doing as well as some of the other debaters who are older than me. And because of that, I felt very excluded from my team because I wasn't doing well. They were making comments about my records and things like that. So I think a very big thing I want to emphasize is that, like, no matter how you're doing, that should not be a reason that you aren't included in the debate space. Like, the debate space is just everyone who does debate. It should not be sectioned off to people who are doing better than others or people who are well known than others. It should just be everyone in the space in general, just helping everyone in the space to become as good as they can be. And I think that's a really big issue that people today still struggle with. They still talk bad about other people. They still exclude people based on their records and things like that, which is a really big issue we should do to solve because that's one of the biggest forms of exclusion in debate, which is something we can solve so easily by just being more friendly to another. And it also just discourages people from continuing the activity if they don't feel included. About being left out of discussions, I remember I've had a lot of experiences with this. One of my friends who had been more well known than I had been had gone up to a group of debaters who were discussing something that I was interested in. And so I started talking about it as well because they were talking as well. And as soon as I had said something, not one of them had acknowledged anything I had said. And it was very exclusionary just because I did not feel very comfortable being there. Also, to note, I was like the only woman in there, which once again, talking about misogyny in debate, I feel like there's a lot of misogyny in debate where women aren't just heard in debate, but not only going off women, there's a lot of minorities in debate who aren't as well heard as those who are in the majority. But I just think it's a really big issue when people are leaving people outside of round as well, because once again, this can just discourage someone because they don't feel as included. And then the last thing about commenting on other people, how they do in round, I believe everyone has their own circumstance on what happens during a round. Like, they can have their own things going on, or their own performance may not be the best. That gives you no right to comment on how people are doing or comment on how bad they are. I think one good thing is giving constructive criticism, but that is when you give it to someone's face, not give it behind their back. Just implementing all these little things are just ways we can stop the exclusion in debate and just make people feel more comfortable going into and continuing the sport. I think there's a lot of things we can do pertaining the exclusion in debate. First, not commenting on our opponents unless it's positive, something I said in the last slide. Just doing this makes people feel less excluded because there's no fear that someone's going to say something based on their performance of a one-time thing. Also including everyone in prep groups and team spaces, especially in team spaces. I stress this a lot because as a team, you should be working together, not working against each other, because when you work together, everyone in the team can just do better. Limiting interruptions during crosses is one thing I brought up much earlier, but I still think it's a very valid issue just because it's just about having general respect about someone and just continuing letting them say what they want and then kindly letting them know if you want to say something is very important. No distractions during the round itself. What I mean by this is no head shaking, no eye rolling, no talking, no laughing. Just once again, just general things about respect and letting people say what they want and hearing out their ideas before making a comment on it, which you do have time to in your other speech, and you don't need to do it during someone's speech itself. And then the last thing is a very basic thing. Refrain from saying anything elitist, racist, homophobic, misogynistic, or classist. This is just the things about being a good person, and you should continue this into the debate space and not judge anyone based on something they cannot control. At the end, I just wanted to include a few resources. Beyond Resolved, I think, is a very great organization. It talks about a lot of issues, has a lot of different debaters involved, and I think one of the resources I linked is actually a blog that Beyond Resolved has, and they're accepting responses from anyone. And I find this especially helpful if I ever need to vent anything out. I can just also look at other people who experience the same thing I do and realize that I'm not in this alone, or I can even write stuff that I want. So I think it's a very good resource to have. I also referenced the articles. I put down the links of the reference articles that I had. These are very good papers that go into the studies of exclusion in debate, which I think are very important to read about. I also included the Women's Debate Org Institute, and I think this is a very good resource as well, especially for the women in debate. They have a lot of resources on misogyny in debate, how to reach out, how to be a part of it, which I think is a very great thing to engage in. To discuss this further, you can reach out to me in any of my socials that I link down below. And I just want to thank you all for listening, and I hope the rest of your debate camp is going great. Thank you.